So for those of you that I haven't had a chance to meet, my name is Mike Strati. I'm an executive consultant for a strategic advisory firm by the name of Culture Index. I'm here in Phoenix, Arizona. I was born and raised in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I've been in Arizona for about 10 years. And I had the opportunity to meet Matt, who runs the BBB for Arizona and Southern California about 6 months ago. Got introduced to Faustine through some of the work that I do. And I had made an offer if they ever thought it would be helpful to provide information specific to the type of work that I do that would help their members just learn a little bit more about themselves and how to manage and engage people to use me. And so they gave me the opportunity to meet everybody today. So I'm super excited. This will not be a Culture Index pitch. I promise this will really be more about how do you interpret the survey that you did and how do you understand information to help your organization grow. This presentation is called Moneyball for CEOs. It's really about the triple bottom line, which in our world we perceive as people, purpose, and profit. All right. So let's go. Hello. There we go. What we do at the business that I'm in is we do psychometric. We study, interpret, and then we help mobilize 7 work-related performance traits, and they're psychometric human applied analytics. So what we do is we take a look at how people are naturally hardwired, and we help them understand how they see the world and how those around them see the world. We utilize those bits of information to help the companies focus on 3 primary objectives. The first is more revenue. So if you're looking to grow your revenue, which is obviously the profit of the business, the earnings. So between revenue and earnings, it's a profit, and then scalability. And we help you do it through people and by understanding them. That's why this title is People, Profit, and Purpose. So you all have your reports. We'll go through those here in a second. But part of what I wanted to just kind of throw out there, and these are all rhetorical questions, just some things to think about as we walk through this, is when you have, what's the financial gain that you have seen occur or you've experienced personally when you have a top performer or a good hire? So for those of you that run a business, and Suzanne, I know you run your book business, Vic, I know you're in financial services, and Jolie, I didn't have a chance to learn much about where you were at yet. But for those of you that are in business or running a business, when you bring on the right type of person inside your organization, you know it can have a tremendous financial impact. But how do you know that that was a good person? Vice versa, what's the financial cost of a bad hire or a bad employee? And beyond just the financial cost, what's the cultural expense? What's the emotional investment when you have someone who's not necessarily in alignment with the goals and the expectations that you have? I'm not sure if you've ever done this. I worked for a financial services company for over a decade, and as part of my role, I oversaw talent acquisition, leadership development. I helped financial advisors put together their strategic business plans, and frequently we would take really successful employees or people inside our organization, and we would see a gap inside the organization, say they've done really well here. I wonder if of course they're going to do a great job over here. And then we would move them over. And the question is, does that always work? Did it work for you? I know in our case, sometimes it did, other times it didn't. Let's see, I'm going to admit. There you go. How do you keep top performers happy and engaged? 34% of employment is fully engaged in your organization. That basically means that wherever you are, whatever industry you're in, 34% of the people that currently work for you are fully engaged in the work that they do. They're there to help you grow your top line and bottom line. They're there and they enjoy the work. They positively impact the culture. 53% of people are what we call disengaged employees. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily working against your organization, but they're really there for a paycheck, and there's an opportunity for them to improve on the enjoyment of their work. And then there's 13% of people inside organizations who we call actively disengaged, which basically means those are folks that unfortunately they're just not a good fit for the organization and likely would be much happier doing something else or working somewhere else. So for those top 34%, we know that they're 21 more percent productive and have a direct impact on top and bottom line than the other part of your organization. So how do you keep those folks happy and engaged? and enthusiastic about staying with your organization. What's the financial hit to losing a key person? I've been punched in the gut many a time in my leadership career over the last 10 or 15 years, where I've got a great person inside our organization and I think they're super happy, and all of a sudden they leave. And not only do they take the success that they were bringing to our organization, which obviously impacts our revenue, but it's a huge cultural hit. And it sort of, I was unaware of why that happened. So when we're talking about people, profit, and purpose, if you've got someone that you believe is the right person, they're helping you increase your profit, maybe they're not aligned with your purpose. With challenging people decisions, do you trust your gut or do you use analytics? So is it more of a, hey, let's give this person one more chance because I really see the best in them, I believe that they can do that? Or is it, boy, data and statistics tells me that they're just not going to recover from that error, so it's time to cut the cord? What should you use? What makes sense? And then last, do you know why some great people struggle with the duties assigned? I've had the opportunity to work with some amazing people, and we just could never figure out why they struggled to be successful in the work, because we both liked each other, but boy, they were just really poor at the execution of their responsibilities. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And for those of you that have done your surveys, this will be a lot more relevant for those who haven't had the chance. So Jolie, I know that you had said that you're working on doing yours. Susan, I know you have yours. Oops, where did my little thing go? Here we go. Baba, I don't think you did one in Clayton. I don't think you did one as well, but hang in there. This will be more theoretical. Marilyn just joined, but hopefully this afterwards. And for those of you that haven't done it, I sent out the survey about a week ago. Came from Culture Index. It's probably in your email. And if you want to take a few minutes when we're finished to complete that, then you can just reach out to me and I'd be happy to interpret your data. Okay, so for those of you that have your report with you, and I'm going to stop share for just a second. I'm going to see if Jolie had finished hers. So if she had, I can send it to her really quick. Give me 1 second. All right, Jolie, I'm going to save this and send it to you. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. Let's get that to Jolie here. I promise this will be worth it. Faustine, I had never met Faustine, and in many cases, I don't meet a lot of the people until, but it's pretty amazing some of the data that we are able to identify through the information. Okay, so let me share my screen again.
You were pretty much like a psychic when you shared my my information.
Well, that's because we were spying on you. We put a camera in your.
Well, that would be too scary.
Okay. All right. So Jolie, I sent that to you. Hopefully you'll get that. All right. So everybody should, for those of you that took the survey, you'll see there are two graphs. The top graph is what we call survey traits. It's really how you're hardwired. We'll talk about that in a second. And then the job behaviors is a discussion about where you, how you perceive the need to change who you're naturally hardwired to be in your current work environment in order to achieve success. Okay. We measure seven, I mentioned we measure 7 work-related traits, performance traits. Those are autonomy, social ability, pace, conformity, mental stamina, logic, and ingenuity. Don't worry if you don't get all this right away as you're taking notes. I will go through each of these relatively quickly. But what I want to do is I want to go through the traits portion, or the top graph, really quick, and just explain what that is. So from the time we're 6 to 12 years old, we begin to start formulating how we're going to interact with the world, make decisions, have conversations, and a handful of other things. Those are really intrinsic hardwiring. It's a combination of environmental and hereditary, so where we grew up, who we grew up around, so it's nature and nurture. Those traits remain consistent once we hit 12 years old. So by the time we're 12 years old, it becomes our thumbprint. It's really, doesn't matter if we're 12 or 83 years old, that's how we're going to be walking around normally, being predictive in our behaviors. We've given this survey to people 10 years apart, and their top graphs don't change. You are who you are. People will frequently say, but Mike, that's not necessarily true. I've matured. maybe I've gotten married, I've had kids, or other things have happened. I think I'm a different person. And part of what we say is we say, yes, you mature, but when you're intrinsically hardwired the same way. The only time it might change is if you've had a traumatic event or some sort of injury to the head or other things. The bottom graph, which is job behaviors, that is how you're perceiving the need to modify in your existing work environment in order to achieve success. So those are learned behaviors based off of your following observations and perceptions of what's currently happening in your existing situation. They always will be fluid and changing. So again, if this survey is given 10 years apart, top graph remains the same. Job behaviors will be specific to that moment of time. It's a response to the external demands that are being put on you, which oftentimes includes things that are happening away from the work office, so personally or other items. And what we're doing is when we look at these two, a lot of times, and I'm going to go back really fast, people will say, come on, go back, there we go. People say, well, Mike, should these match? Okay, and our opinion is that people can modify who they naturally are in their work environment and have success, but it's going to come at a cost. So back to the people, profit, and purpose, we're trying to help organizations and individuals, leaders in particular, learn how to better communicate and engage people based off of who they naturally are so that they can maximize who they are in their work environment. Because if you are modifying for a longer period of time, it's going to cost you energy, time, engagement, happiness, enjoyment. On your survey, we're going to look now at the top graph, the survey traits, and I'm going to help interpret how to understand this data. I mentioned we measure 7 work-related traits, A, B, C, and D. They're independent constructs. They stand alone. We will look at, they're independently measured and scored. So I will talk about each one in and of itself, but they are compared to each other and they're connected by this black line. We don't have nearly enough time to go through all the information, but I'm going to go through each individual trait, and then I'm going to use 2 examples of people who were generous enough to let me use them as guinea pigs to talk about some of the combinations of traits. They surround this red vertical line, and that red vertical line is the center of a standard deviation sliding scale bell curve. The reason why it's a sliding scale bell curve is each individual survey completed is done by the person, and therefore this red line may move right or it may move left depending on how much data they give us. But we then associate it with a bell curve, meaning this is normative behavior. Any trait that falls to the right is more, that person's going to exhibit more of a particular trait. Any trait to the left, less of that particular trait. And if it falls directly right on the line, then they're going to be normative in that particular behavior. You'll also see the further it falls from the red line, the more obvious and predictable that trait becomes. For those of you that are familiar with sigmas, we have 3 sigmas, and basically on each side, and that covers 98% of the population. So in this particular case, this person's A trait is 4.5 centiles high from the red line, meaning they're in the top 2% of people who will be predictive in this behavior. Every 2 centiles is a standard deviation of predictive behavior, going from somewhat obvious to very obvious, which is in the top 14%, to extremely obvious. It matters how far each of these dots falls from the red line because it will create more predictive behavior. We also have what we call energy units. This is a standalone construct. We measure this on a scale of 0 to 100. For those of you that are analytical, skeptical, and data related, I'm going to share this with you. For those that are more about people, you can turn out for 30 seconds and then come back. But energy units basically is it measures the size of your daily battery, measured on a scale of 0 to 100, and we'll talk about it specifically here in a second. And then we have 2 constructs that actually have a numerical placement on the grid. So this 0 through 10 down here measures these 2 constructs on a scale of 0 is low, 10 is high, and they actually have a numerical placement. The 0 to 10 up here is just solely measuring how far each dot falls from the red line. So this red line is at 3.5, so these 4 traits, that means this B trait is 0.5 centiles high. Down here, this means you are a 3 out of 10 based off of this particular trait, or you are 9 out of 10 based off of this particular trait. All right. So here we go. Let's jump into these individual traits. A in our world stands for autonomy. It's really the ability to choose, being self-sufficient. It's the control of destiny. if you have a low A trait, low meaning to the left, and remember the distance from the red line matters. So some of these will be very accurate in your description, and some maybe not so much so because of the predictability of your behavior. But overall, if you have an A trait left, what the data tells us is that you're a selfless, present, meaning you're in the moment. You're a micro thinker. You're about consensus, getting collaboration. You're a team player, amiable, agreeable, peaceful, timid, humble, unobtrusive. This is really about a person who is about policies and procedures. They're a team player looking to see how they can help, servant-hearted, almost where they're very accommodating. And the further left you go, you actually become submissive, meek, where you need and crave the need for direction and leadership. Because low A's have a tendency to be risk adverse, because risk means potentially things going wrong, where low A's or A's to the left prefer stability, in most cases, lower risk-based information. They dislike confrontation, okay, because they like harmony. And confrontation to low A's is disruptive of harmony. If you are an A trait right, you are more independent, you're proactive, you're more of a macro thinker. Enough is never enough. It really equals more. Confident, self-starter, assertive, resourceful, individual, competitive. Think of this person as a serial entrepreneur. They are competitive. The further right they go, they become arrogant, domineering, hard-headed, thick-headed. You might think those are negative words, but someone who is 4 centiles right with an A trait says, thank you for the compliments. These are very forward-thinking, achievement-oriented, accomplishment-focused people who are visionaries. This is all about gas pedal. A trait, high A traits right, in organizations, these are the gas pedals. They are pushing the envelope in regards to what's possible. So what are some of the positives of the low A trait? When I say positives, I mean good things. This is a selfless person inside your organization who's going to do pretty much whatever you ask because they want to help however they can. They're all about harmony, relationship, good for culture. These are warm people. The downside to a low A trait is they're frequently going to need direction. They may be hesitant to move forward without getting additional opinions or permission. They may not see the train coming because they can't think beyond the micro. They don't look out macro 3 or 5 years. So they struggle in figuring out doing this impacts this in 4 or 5 years. What's one of the positives of a high A trait? Boy, they are all about accomplishment. They're driven, they're competitive. They are going to move your organization forward. They look at conflict as problem solving. Why? Because a high A trait sees a conflict and they know I have to get through that. When I do, I can then move on. So they help move things along quicker. The disadvantage to a high A trait is they can be arrogant. They can be egotistical, narcissistic, and they can exhaust people from the standpoint as they're constantly moving forward. High A traits, I accomplished my goal, next one. I accomplished that goal, next one. Rarely ever do they stop, they're constantly moving forward. Let's jump to B trait, social ability. We look at this as the need, want, and desire to seek social acceptance. Really measures introversion and extroversion. If you are a B trait left, you're quiet, reserved, sincere. The further left you go, you're really more introspective, retiring, self-conscious. You're even almost to the point of very reflective and shy. And if you continue to go further left, you become withdrawn, secretive, very reserved, reclusive. Low B traits, they're about data and statistics over people. Many times people will call low B traits pessimistic, and their response often is, I am realistic. High B traits, outgoing, positive, optimistic, enthusiastic, persuasive, influential, friendly. The further you go, they're very socializing, fluent, socially poised. And if you go even further out, 4 more centiles, these folks are loquacious. They are very highly persuasive and sometimes seen as superficial. They are all about relationships, connections, people. They care what people think. The relationship is what drives them primarily, the connection to people. So what are the benefits of a low B? This person is great if you want someone who's just going to come to work and work, because they work incredibly well if not interrupted by people. They're very direct, blunt. You're going to know where they stand. And they, because of their data and analytics, they're frequently looking for ways to poke holes in information or gather information, make sure that decisions are made off of technical based information, data and analytics, not off of empathy. Okay, what's the low part of B? They're blunt, they're direct. If you're a high B, you misread low Bs, you think they don't care or that they're not interested in having conversations with you. They can be perceived as pessimistic. High Bs, what's the positive? Boy, these people are great for enthusiasm and motivation, encouragement and excitement and connecting people. Great for customer service relationships, or if you're trying to build a reputation, this person is going, if they believe in what they're talking about, they're going to try to tell everybody. You can drop them in the middle of 50 strangers, and an hour later, there's no strangers, including the wall, because they made friends with the wall as well. Downside to a B trait is because they use empathy in reading a room and they have the natural intuition to go in and read a room, oftentimes or occasionally they may miss because they didn't look at enough of the data and analytics. They trusted their gut too frequently. They can be too chit-chatty and talkative, i.e. they never shut up, or they talk verbally, they process verbally, meaning that they talk a lot because that's how they problem solve. And it might confuse people who are lower in the B because they don't know what they really mean or don't. Let's jump to C trait. C in our world stands for patience. If you are a low C trait, you have the lack thereof patience. You're tense, impatient, quick, fast, high-strung, intense, disruptive, multitasking, a variety of work, restless, high sense of urgency. The further you go, you become almost volatile, extremely impatient. So if you're 4 or more centiles, low Cs are about getting things done, not just now, but as quickly as possible. The reason why this is valuable to know inside an organization is this person handles, well, we'll talk about that in a second, but they handle stress and pressure well. This is a natural sense of urgency and likes a variety of work. A high C, so a C to the right. These folks are patient, they're methodical, they're stable. It's about routine, being a single task focused, inbox, outbox. Let me finish item number 1 before I go to 2 and 3 and 4 and so on and so forth. They're checklist oriented and they're very deliberate in their movements and in the work that they do. They can, the further right they go, sometimes they can be very slow or phlegmatic, lethargic, placid. You sort of sometimes want to kick them in the rear end and say, please hurry up, or show that you are alive. Upside to a low C. If you want something done and you need it done immediately, it's the low C who can help. They thrive in pressure. Downside to low C, they can be intimidating and intense and candidly rude because they're cutting people off because they want you to move quicker. And so they think they know what you're going to say, and they say, can you please hurry up? This 30-minute meeting should last 10 minutes. We can do this quicker. Positive to a high C. Boy, they are calm and methodical and stable. In stressful moments, they are the ones that people go to. They're the anchor. They listen very well. And when left alone, they have laser-like focus to be able to accomplish a task. Downside, if I put pressure or stress or any other uncertainty on a high C, they will not panic, but be disrupted and not be able to do their work as well as they need to. They move slow and methodical, Sometimes they don't understand the urgency behind things, or they may struggle understanding how to prioritize or understand how to prioritize tasks or information. Let's jump to the D trait. D trait stands for conformity, follow through. It really means doing is what is expected. It's about perfectionism. A low D trait. So this is someone who is lower or to the left. This is more of an out-of-box thinker. They're casual, they're independent, they're informal, they're uninhibited. They're careless and non-compliant the further left they go. They can be freewheeling, they can be obstinate, almost rebellious if they go 4 centiles left. I've got a daughter who is 4 centiles left, and man, if you didn't know her, you would think she's an absolute rebel. D trait's right. Detail-oriented. So imagine someone who continues to go further right, and you're talking about conformity. It's about the micro, the small picture. They live with historical data. They talk about rules and regulations. There is no gray, it's black or white. They have to be very thorough, precise. They are blame avoidant. We'll talk about that here in a second. These people are the folks inside your organization that like to put together process and procedure that is repeatable and sustainable. And it is done accurately and thoroughly. They do not break the rules. Deep down, if you are a D trait right, and the further right you go, you have to be right about everything. Upside to the low D, unrestricted thinking. Imagine if you could live in a world where there were no rules. How creative could you be versus having to follow the rules? They also are fun, they're spontaneous, they're willing to empower and delegate. Downside to a lower D, they're forgetful. They literally misplace their keys or their checkbook or their wallet frequently. They make commitments, and then the day later they had forgotten they made the commitments. Why? Because it's not because they meant to, they just are literally forgetful. The other thing about a low D is many people think they're argumentative. And what's interesting about that is they're not. They just want you to know there's a different side to the story, and that not everything has to be black or white. They live in the gray. Upside to a high D. Boy, if I give them something, it's going to be done accurately and thoroughly. And I only usually have to give it to them once because they soak in the knowledge and they constantly are seeking more information to make sure that they can handle that task or that parts of that project, and they use all the information available to them. Very loyal, especially if they trust me to be thorough and precise. And they have a high sense of self-duty. Downside to a low D is they're really hard on themselves, and they extend that to others as well. They expect themselves to be perfect and others to be perfect also. They can be blame avoidant. The reason being is it's all about collection of data and information and experiences. When I give you something, if I'm a high D and there's something wrong with it, it's not my fault. I gathered as much information as I possibly could. I just wasn't given the right bits of information. That's why it went wrong. Energy units, that's there between the D and the L on the left-hand side. Think about this as the size of your daily battery. We look at energy units for a few different reasons. I'm going to go through this quickly. When we look at energy units, we use it inside our assessment for a couple things. If you see a score between 0 and 10 or 90 and 100, that tells us that the data is probably not accurate and that there was an avoidance response to the survey, meaning someone was trying to game our system. Maybe they took it in a language that wasn't their primary language, or they just timed out. That's helpful because it adds to the validity of our data. If they're an energy unit of 11 to 30, they're like a AAA battery, burn super bright, incredibly intense for short periods of time, benefit from more frequent breaks throughout the day. So they literally work in 1 or 2 hour increments, followed by 5 or 10 minute break to recharge that battery. They can go at it again. Average energy units is 31 to 60. This just means you can plug and play as long as necessary in order to make sure that the work is completed. And if you have a higher energy unit, 61 to 90, just imagine a very large battery that burns more stable and consistent for a long period of time, 5 months, 6 months, 6 days a week, 10, 12 hours a day. When they hit the end of their battery, they need a longer period of time to recharge. I'm going to give some examples because we talk about people and how do you help use this data to grow your profit and help them attach to your purpose. I use this program for 10 years inside my organization. If I ever had someone come on my team that had an energy between 11 and 30, I would sit them down and say, we're going to design your schedule on 1 to 2 hour increments, followed by 15 to 20-minute breaks. Every other Friday, I'm going to give you a half day off that I'm going to pay for, assuming you get all your work done. And then once a quarter, I'd like you to take 1 3-day weekend. How does that sound? They'd be like, that's incredible. If I had someone who was a 61 to 90, I'd sit them down, I'd say, we're going to work on your schedule. Here's what you're going to focus on for the next 5 or 6 months. I'm going to need you at least 5 days a week, sometimes 6. You'll probably be putting in a minimum of 8 hours. There'll be days where you'll be putting in 12. I know you can handle this because you have high mental stamina. At the end of 5 months, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have you take 10 consecutive days off. I'll pay for 5. You take the other 5 out of your vacation. How does that sound? They say, awesome. It's really understanding how to maximize and get the most out of your people. So we use this to understand if someone's trying to game our system. We use it to understand their mental stamina units in regards to how they focus and how much battery they have on a daily basis. We also take a look, and the higher the person's energy units are, the longer they can attempt to modify, not that they are good or bad at it, but attempt to modify in the work environment before they become mentally fatigued. If I'm a 65, I can attempt longer to modify. If I'm a 15, I can only modify for a few days, if not maybe a week, and then I will become mentally fatigued. And then the last thing is when you're looking at your top graph to the bottom graph, we look at energy unit comparisons. If there is a plus or minus 10 in your top graph to your bottom graph, that tells us that you're under pressure or stress. Pressure and stress manifests itself differently with different people. Some try to work through it. Others naturally shut themselves down because they have to keep that mental stamina to get through other parts of their day. This is helpful because it allows us to understand how to have that conversation with someone. Down below the line, we have logic. Remember, these 2 traits are measured specifically on a numerical scale. Logic is reasonable, sensible thought. It's the ability to control emotions. 0, 1, and 2, these are emotive decision makers. Heart on their sleeve, open kimono. They're charismatic. They see the best in people. They easily show their emotions. We call this occasionally emotionally inconsistent. New data that comes in their way can be perceived as fight or flight. They have a tough time controlling their emotions. Normative range is 3 through 7. 3 is mostly heart, 7 is mostly head, but it's a combination of both emotive interpretations as well as logical interpretations. Then we have the higher L's, which are 8 through 10. These are Spock or Sheldon, depending on what generation you are. They're very logical, stoic, heart's buried deep. They're hard to read. They're almost emotionless. It doesn't mean they don't care. It just means that when data comes in, they can quickly separate out the sentiment emotion, put that aside, and they can look at the data, the black and white, and then they'll deal with the emotion later. Logic also, when we look at logic in our world helps us understand someone's esteem. And generally what we know, and for those of you that have, if you have a lower logic, a 0, 1, or 2, that means you wear your heart on your sleeve. It means frequently that your esteem is also a challenge for you because you're frequently second guessing or doubting if you're doing the right thing. Ingenuity, the last trait. Think of ingenuity as an original spark of imagination. It's inventiveness, originality of thinking. The normative range is 0 to 6. If you fall 0 to 6, you're in about 85% of the population. You're just more linear, concrete. You're not really sort of inventing anything new. There's a difference between creative, because a D trait, D is in dog, left is very creative, or a high A trait is very creative as well. They're just not innovative. They're not necessarily making or inventing, having an original spark of imagination. High I trait 7 through 10, they're ridiculously innovative. Spatial reasoning. Think of Pablo Picasso, Elon Musk, Walt Disney. They have the ability to invent things that didn't previously exist. They may have no relationship. A great example is Walt Disney sees a mouse run across his floor and he creates a theme park that becomes the most well-known theme park in the history of theme parks, all because a mouse ran across his floor. Who thinks of that? Well, 7, 8, 9s, and 10s do. If you are a 7, 8, 9, or 10, That just means you have many ideas that are running through your head on a daily basis. Be careful because you sometimes can get distracted by those ideas. However, there are multi-million-dollar ideas running through your head. You just have to figure out which ones they are. So before I jump into two very gracious participants at today's call who are letting me look at their data, questions about the information that we went through or any of the dots? Okay. And Faustine, if I'm missing something because I didn't see a question typed in, please interrupt and let me know. So some of you may or may not know Vic. Oh, there's one buzzing, so give me 1 sec. Let me look. Nothing so far. Okay. All right. So some of you may know Vic. I didn't know Vic before I saw his survey, but Vic graciously is allowing me to take a look at his information. So when we look at Vic's top graph, his survey traits, here's what I see about Vic. First off, Vic's red line has moved to 7.25. That means of the 174 words that were available for each of you to circle in that top survey, Vic circled quite a few of those words. That's why his red line has moved right. He gave us a certain amount of data. It's called free choice. The free choice of our survey allows the accuracy and the validity of the information to move up to 0.9% statistically valid. We're not perfect. No program is perfect, but we are the most statistically valid that we're aware of, and we're the only one that provides a validity study to prove it. Some of you have may taken DISC or Colby or Myers-Briggs. We are at 0.9 statistical validity. The other programs that we're aware of, there's a max of 0.75% statistical validity. Okay, so Vic's A trait is 1.75 centiles high. So that tells me that Vic is somewhat to very innovative, forward-thinking, hard-headed, thick-headed, opinionated, entrepreneurial. This is a man who gets up each morning, he's focused on achievement and accomplishment. And once Vic achieves or accomplishes something, he wants to move on to the next. His internal motivator is right here, these things. He is a strategic thinker. He's also focused on data and analytics. He's introspective, he's reserved, he's very direct, he's candid, he's to the point. I know that through this. Between his A and his B combination, what it also tells me about Vic is what we call strategically social. So Vic is not necessarily out looking to make a lot of relationships, but there are a few that he knows can help him get to his goal. So he will develop those few relationships, and the relationships he does develop are fewer, but probably more meaningful for him because he's naturally skeptical and he's more introspective. Vic thinks about things internally. If he tells something out loud, he's already thought about it. He's looked at it from a data analytical standpoint, and he really means it. The distance between your A and your B is a great way to think about problem solving. Vic is a deductive reason thinker, meaning I can give Vic a couple key points. He can deduct out all the other information and he can come to a conclusion just like that. If it goes well, he's not surprised because that's generally what ends up happening. If it goes poorly, he's willing to take ownership of it and say, that's all right, let's keep moving forward. He's also he's got a natural sense of urgency. He likes a variety of work, so he can be repetitive and calm and stable if need be, but generally he will prefer to work under pressure and have a variety of things to do and move quickly. And he's very detail-oriented, specific. This is a man who is creating systems and processes that are repeatable and sustainable. They're by the rules and regulations. Not surprised based off of his past work history that he ended up in an industry that has very strict guidelines. And if I were working with Vic and I was giving him my money as a financial advisor or looking for him to help me with my overall financial plan, this is a very trustworthy man who has thought about many of the tangents that could potentially happen, and he's created systems that solve not only the problems for today, but my problems in the future. Mostly logical, a battery that allows him to work for long periods of time before needing extended breaks. That's what I see in Vic. Vic, is that an accurate description of you?
Shall I understand that I passed the test to be part of your team?
Now, Vic, it's not a test. There's no wrong or right answers.
No, very good.
This is a man
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a man who really enjoys working for himself. will always work best when able to achieve the challenges that he sets for himself. In his work environment, currently, it just means, as you can see, a shift, and this is part of what we do. A couple things, his red line has moved right. That just means he circled even more words. So when he's thinking about work, he's even having to add more data points. So he's adding more to himself. He has turned up his friendliness, and this is partially because of what he does, and he's a small business, and therefore he's probably the head marketer. He's probably the head customer service, customer relations. So he has to turn up that natural charm, or the perception is he's turning up that natural charm to be a little more relatable and empathetic towards people. He is lots on his plate, so although normally already quick, he is speeding himself up, and there's even more plates that he is spinning. And in order to do that, to be a little nicer, more empathetic, to speed things up, he's turned down his detail orientation. All that really means is he realizes in order to achieve some of the things that he needs to, he may not be able to have such high expectations of others and himself. And so therefore he lets a few more things slide that normally he would not. Now, not big things, not talking about, we don't measure ethics or character, but this just says that he's not paying attention to as many of the details as he normally would. And he's being a lot more empathetic. What I have seen in doing this for the last 6 months is there are a lot of people who are up in 7, 8, 9, and 10, very logical. Due to coronavirus and just the crazy situation that has created, many people have become much more empathetic. Folks who are highly logical, 8, 9s, and 10s, they're even showing more empathy because they're realizing, how do you run an organization where I was 500 employees working out of an office space of 60,000 square feet, and now I've got 60,000 square feet and 0 employees in that space, and they're all working from home. They're having to be more empathetic. But in general, the data would show that Vic, in making these modifications, is using 66 gallons of gas on a daily basis when he normally has 57. So Vic's pretty tired at the end of every day. And the hope would be, at some point over a period of time, that he'd be able to either add someone into his organization that would maybe come in and be a little bit more of the customer-facing, customer relationship, allow him to be more of the problem solver, making things bigger, better, faster, and thinking more futuristic and analytical. And somebody else can come in and do the customer service side of things or the relational side of things, which would help turn down his energy units back towards more of where he is. Again, modifications, everybody does them. We can't solve that for everybody. It's just a question of, what does it cost you? So let's now jump to, let me see here. And I've got us for another about 15 minutes, so I'll finish and then I'll open it up to questions. This is Marilyn Huffman. Some of you may know her. She works with the BBB. She is a regional director up in Prescott. And if we look at Marilyn, I picked these two because they couldn't be more polar opposite. And I wanted to be able to prove the statistical validity of who they naturally are hardwired to be. So Marilyn, her internal driver is all about people and connections and relationships and interaction. Let's see, let me look at that chat real quick. Oh, okay. Marilyn says, laughs out loud. Very true. Thanks, Marilyn. All right. So she is persuasive and influential. She walks in the room and she reads people. She just loves connecting and storytelling. So in her role at the BBB, if I am a business that she's coming to talk to, she is so excited to meet me and tell me all about the benefits that BBB is going to provide to me and the organization. She's going to sell me stories like you wouldn't believe. All of that is amazing. What she will not likely do is tell me the analytics and the data behind why I should necessarily become. Now, she's probably adjusted, and I had that conversation. I don't want to be prescriptive in my analysis, but because of her experience, she probably has realized I just can't influence and positively talk people into joining the BBB. I actually have to provide some data and analytics sometimes, so I better at least have that in my back pocket. But man, they're going to fall in love with me. I'm going to fall in love with them, and they're going to think incredibly highly of our organization because they won't be able to resist my charms. She's also very cooperative and diplomatic, amiable. I see that here in her A trait. Dislikes confrontation. Again, this just means that she's more about harmony and relationships and connecting with people than Vic, who's more about, I'm looking at the problem, I'm looking at data analytics, and I'm solving the problem. She's looking at people, trying to make sure that she's influencing and persuading them to see the value of what of why the relationship matters. Calm, stable, methodical, systematic, creature of habit. She is a good listener. She is best performing when she is an inbox outbox. So if there's 10 things, she's going to start with number 1, go to 2, 3, 4, 5. Please don't disrupt me, because if you do, that can throw me off. Again, all of this, you learn how to modify and make some adjustments. But I'm talking about in a world, if possible, how can you perform the best based off of who you are? And she's non-conforming, independent, fun, casual, willing to delegate, prefers to delegate, because she's not necessarily living by the rules. Rules are kind of for suckers. All you people who think there's just black and white, you're missing a lot of the gray, which is where a lot of really creative, neat things happen. Okay. She's got a logic of 1, which just tells me she wears her heart on her sleeve. I know how she feels day in and day out. We talked about this yesterday, and she was very open, which I really appreciate. And she knows that there are times where that, when information comes in, that emotion and the reaction to that can be a detriment to her. She also knows that that's part of what makes people like her so much, that when she's having a great day and she's really enthusiastic and excited, the people around her are having a great day. She has what we call an AV conflict or AD conflict, and this is some of the things that we teach folks that we work with, because it's really about knowledge transfer. And because these two are stacked, what's interesting is it's on the left side line. This is an accommodating, amiable, unobtrusive person who still wants things her own way, because she's a little bit of a rebel. She's kind of non-conforming, and she doesn't necessarily want to have to abide by the rules and regulations. And that's really important for me if I'm working with Marilyn to understand, because we're going to be in meetings, we'll be having conversations. She may not necessarily be proactively wanting to argue with me, and argue is maybe not the right word. She may be thinking Mike's missing some really great stuff because he's trying to follow the rules and regs too much. There's some gray and he's missing some things. And she might not express that, although with Marilyn, because she's got that high B, she talks things out. So if I can get her talking, she probably will. But later she may say to me or think to herself, yeah, I understand what he's saying, but I think there's a better way to do it. And therefore she's, again, accommodating, but maybe wants things her way. In her work environment, and we talked about this, she's just basically turning into what we would say is a smaller version of herself. She's toning herself down in order to try to relate to more people. She's not necessarily changing any of her primary construct traits, but she's turning them down because she realizes I have to shrink myself in order for me to be more relatable to different types of people. And to do that, she's going from realizing that she wears her heart on her sleeve to now I have to control my emotions to do that. And that takes her energy to shrink herself and to be thoughtful of, I can't be as gregarious and outgoing and optimistic, because that means sometimes I'm too forgetful. I have to pay attention to some of the critical details. I'm a one-man army, so I may not have the opportunity to delegate. I've got to pay attention more to the details. I've got to therefore move a little faster in certain areas. And I've got to look at things more logically. So again, in order to shrink, it takes some energy and effort for her to do that. For those of you, again, that didn't have the opportunity to complete the survey, what I would encourage you to do is go back and look in your inbox, sorry about that, and look for the survey requests from about 7 to 10 days ago from Culture Index. And I'd be happy if you reach out to me individually to walk through your specific results. So all of this goes back to, and then I'll open it up for questions the last 5 minutes. It's really about, when we talk about Moneyball for CEOs, we specifically use our data points to help organizations or people better understand and communicate, to be better leaders about how do you maximize each individual person inside your organization. And also, when you begin to hire or scale, how do you make sure that you understand what it is that you really want in a role? And then as you're interviewing people, making sure that they are naturally hardwired to be successful. I go back to some of those questions. I've done literally probably 10,000 or more interviews in my life. And I remember when I would sit down across the table for somebody and they had a high B trait like Marilyn. Marilyn comes in and she interviews with me. And here's what I'm thinking about Marilyn when she's done. That woman is enthusiastic and she's excitable and she's convinced me she can do this because she's persuasive, she's loquacious, and she's excited. I hire Marilyn and I tell her she's going to sit in the back corner office. She's going to look at data and analytics and spreadsheets all day long. She's going to have to be proactively problem solving without much direction or policies or procedures. She's going to have to figure things out on herself. And there's going to be constant changes in her work priorities and shifting duties. But she's nice and she persuaded me she could do the business. I just set up poor Marilyn for terrible failure because I'm a horrible leader, because I didn't fully understand that. Now, if I interviewed Vic, I walked away with the interview thinking, man, he didn't say much. He was pretty direct and blunt. I'd ask him questions and his responses were very measured. And he seemed very confident and not very team-oriented. So in the past, I may not hire him, but that role I described that I just gave Marilyn, Vic would kill it. So I hired the wrong person when I actually had the right person right in front of me. And I missed out on opportunities to find the right people, find someone who's going to really be engaged in our purpose. And then obviously they're going to have a significantly bigger impact on the profit of our organization. I'm going to turn this off and open it up to questions. Let me make this a little bit bigger. And please feel free to either type in questions or go ahead and ask me whatever questions you have. Why can't I make this bigger? Let's stop the screen. There we go. How can I help?
Mike, this is Vic.
Hello, Vic.
Can you hear me well?
Can.
Okay, perfect. I have a question for you. I mean, I'm impressed about this information, even though we had a conversation previously, and I mean, we're very detailed, but also today, I know more about myself. It's interesting. But what I was thinking is, even though it could be addressed to executives or managerial positions in your company, but also it looks like it's a good tool when you are going to hire, you know, certain, a person with certain profile in your organization. So the question to you is, do you suggest kind of to apply this tool with when I'm in the hiring session or I don't know how to say.
Yeah, in the process. You're in the process of being
HR, to be part of the HR tool, something like that.
Yeah, so one of the things I want to make abundantly clear is there are hiring programs out there. We are not. We are a strategic advisory firm. But our organizations, when we transfer this knowledge to an organization and they implement the program, part of what we talk to them about is how do you implement this inside of human resources? So when you put a job posting out there, one, what does the posting say? Does it actually attract the type of person you want? Two, do you clearly understand what it is that you want inside the role that you need? And then three,
right.
are you finding the person who's aligned to be successful? So to answer your question, yes, all of the companies we work with, they utilize it in the hiring process, but it's only about 10% of what they end up using it for, because it's really, finding the talent is important, but it's really maintaining the talent and keeping them happy and engaged and allowing them to develop inside your organization, which is the most important part, because it's really about the scale ultimately of a company. So yes, Vic, it's used in hiring. And more specifically, a lot of our companies really maximize the data, mobilize the data once people are on their team.
Got it. Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Marilyn asks, is there a basic way to figure out how much time off a person's work to take based off of their results? I want to be sensitive. I would just say if you're between 11 and 30 energy units, I would say it's probably more beneficial for you to take shorter periods of time off more frequently. So a 3-day weekend, maybe every once a month or something along that lines. And if you're a higher energy unit, so if you're 60 to maybe 90, you're probably better off every 3 or 4 months, maybe even 5 or 6 months, taking 4 to 7 to 8 days off because your battery needs longer to recharge. Good question. What other questions? Well, I want to be cognizant of your time. We're right at 10 o'clock. Faustine has my information. If I can be of any help, any additional way, or you got questions specifically about your individual survey, I'd be happy to spend a few minutes with you, walk you through some more specific data. But I hope that was helpful and that you learned a little something about yourself, but more importantly, how you can use predictive-based behavioral information and help it grow the companies and the people inside your organization. Thanks, Faustine. I'm gonna log off. We're right at 10 o'clock, and we will talk to you soon.
Yes, thank you so
Thanks,
much, Mike, for taking time out of your busy day to present today's webinar. And I will go ahead and send your information to everyone who is attending today. That way they can reach out to you if they have additional questions that they can think of. So thank you, everyone, for attending. Please have a great weekend.